Warm good evening to all the dignitaries, guests, and delegates present with us today. I, Shambhavi Jaiswal, a youth ambassador with Global Counter-Terrorism Council, along with my fellow colleague Dulmani Atapattu, will be your host for the session. Firstly, I'd like to introduce the topic for the session, that is geopolitical implications of the January 6th, 2021 and incoming administrations. Trump supporters armed with weapons attempted to disrupt the Electoral College vote count and clashed with security personnel at the US Capitol building. We are aware that this has certainly impacted United States' global image and holds serious consequences. We all are questioning this act. Is the world's oldest democracy unable to peacefully do power transition from one leader to another? Or whether the US could continue to spread democracy and human rights abroad? Today, we have all gathered together to initiate talk on this series of issues in the sphere of US political crisis. We open the floor for the discussions on the geopolitical implications of the January 6th, 2021 and incoming administrations. Our social media handles are mentioned in the chat box as well. Kindly follow, like, and share. So stick around with us and enlighten yourself. Now I request Dulmani to introduce the panel of the third session. Over to you, Dulmani.
Thank you, Shambhavi. A very good evening to you all, and sincere apologies for the delay. I, Dulmani Atapattu, the National Joint Secretary and the Chairperson of the India-Sri Lanka Youth Forum of Global Youth, would like to introduce the esteemed speakers present here today. Our first speaker is Excellency Dr. Shekhar Dutt. Excellency Dr. Dutt is the former Defense Secretary and the former Governor of Chhattisgarh. Excellency Dr. Dutt is also a Gallantry Award winner. Our next esteemed speaker is Mr. Jonathan Granoff. He is the president of the Global Security Institute and also a special representative to the United Nations for the Permanent Secretariat of the World Summit of Nobel Peace Laureates. The next esteemed speaker joining us today is Ambassador Gotham Bambawale. Ambassador Bambawale worked in the Indian Foreign Service for 34 years from 1984 to 2018. He was India's ambassador to Bhutan, Pakistan, and China. The next esteemed speaker is Major General Daya Ratnayaka. Major General Daya Ratnayaka is currently serving as the chairperson of the Sri Lanka Port Authority. General Ratnayaka served as the 20th commander of the Sri Lankan Army. Our next amicable speaker is Dr. Hans Jacob Schindler. Dr. Schindler is the Senior Director of the Counter-Extremism Project in New York, United States. Our next esteemed speaker is Dr. Anurag Batra. Dr. Batra is currently the chairman of Business World, a business media and magazine brand. Our final speaker is Mr. Sanjeev Joshipura. Mr. Joshipura serves as the executive director of Diaspora. He has also worked as a staff member on Capitol Hill, advising congressmen and senators on economics and international affairs. This session will be chaired by Ms. Cleo Pascal, who is an international advisory board member of Global Counterterrorism Council and a non-resident senior fellow at Foundation for Defense for Democracies, USA. Ms. Pascal is also an associate fellow at Chatham House, UK. I would like to request the audience to mute yourself for a hindrance-free session. Speakers, please keep in mind that the session would run for 1 hour and 20 minutes due to time constraints. The session will be followed by a round of questions and answers. The chat box is available for any questions. I would also like to request the audience and the dignitaries present today to participate in the polls we have prepared. It is an absolute honor to have all of you present today, and we are looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the topic at hand. I now invite Ms. Cleo Pascal to take over and begin the session. Ms. Pascal, the floor is now yours.
Thank you very much, Dulmani. It's a great pleasure, and I really enjoyed the previous discussions going on. It's a credit to GCTC and also to Global Youth and Rishabh Gulati for putting together this critical topic at a very important time, and the discussion, especially among the youth, has been particularly interesting. We are creating some problems you're going to have to solve, so I'm glad that you're taking the time and you have the space to thoroughly understand the complexities involved. Our topic is a bit of a complicated one because it is very fictional at the moment. We're trying to think about what the geopolitical implications will be. So in order to maybe help us focus, if for the presenters, if you already have a presentation, that's fine. If you're still thinking through the way you want to talk about this, what I'd be interested to know is 1 year from today, what do we think the geopolitical implications might be? You know, will adversaries of the U.S., for example, China, use these cleavages to its advantage. If so, how will that manifest itself geopolitically, domestically? With Amazon kicking Parler off of its servers, will data sovereignty become a bigger issue? Will some of the servers shift to other locations? This is an opportunity perhaps for India to set itself up as a safe data zone. Will this be used as a cover for other terrorist activities from other actors? So 1 year from today, what has happened? What happened on the 6th, and with the change in administration, are there going to be any major shifts going forward? As mentioned, we have 7 amazing speakers and not a lot of time. So if you don't mind keeping it to about 8 minutes, and then, but that won't be your last chance to speak. We'll then go back through the panel and you'll get a chance to comment on everything everybody else has said at the end. And we are very, very lucky to have His Excellency Honorable Shekhar Dutt to kick us off. And I know he's thought about these things and has had to deal with these things over many years and keep the ship of state safe and afloat. So thank you very much, sir. And we're looking forward to your guidance going forward.
Thank you very much, Ms. Pascal. It is so wonderful to be here and sharing the virtual dais. In fact, this subject which has been chosen, the entire subject of discussion tonight, is very, very appropriate, timely, and perhaps it is needed. And secondly, of course, this session subject is very interesting, and I'm sure that the question posed by Ms. Pascal is very, very relevant. I would start by saying that all these years of my being in ministries of defense, then also Secretary of Health, dealing with not only national but also international audiences and governments, I've been saying there's a very interesting commonality between USA and India. Both are large democracies. Both have a value of rule of law. Both have intrinsic freedom of speech and many other freedoms which go along with it, and it allows people to use their initiative, and thereby it allows a society to grow by its own dynamism. Now, so what has happened is there have been some things which has brought the USA in the last few days a little away from the notion which people thought that a democracy should be doing, and that is value of violence in bringing halt, in bringing the activity of the state to a halt. Now that fortunately has been restricted and brought under control, and I'm sure that with the intrinsic ability of USA to handle all different kind of situations, what we are seeing now is not going to be everlasting. And once again, we will have USA taking the world around and showing what a responsible democracy should be doing. Now, coming to this, the situation, what has happened during this period, and that the countries or the societies which have said that no, democracy doesn't mean a thing. The society has to be controlled by powerful people and powerful state and powerful, and therefore there was an erosion of the belief that state has to be benevolent and state has to behave in a rule of law manner. The last few days activities had given some of the very strong states, like where individual freedom meant little, like China and some of the other states. And incidentally, I've been going all over the world and saying that, well, if you travel from the easternmost country, maybe Japan, down towards the west, you will find very few countries which believe in democracy, which believe in rule of law. Japan, South Korea, maybe Thailand used to be sometimes, Australia, New Zealand, India, and then you have you go right across to Western Europe and then North Americas. Not many countries are wedded to the concept of rule of law and freedom of all the natures of freedom. Now, we are now seeing that some of the countries which do not believe in the rule of law, do not believe in the democratic values, would say that no, we are better. We can provide our citizens better way of development. Now, this has to be disabused. This has to come away, because otherwise dictators and similar kind of people who can then take hold of power, they can take the state as their own serfdom. So I would say that I'm quite confident that USA will again move back into the seminal position of being a leading democracy and also becoming more understanding towards the need and therefore the responsibility of responsible countries, and start sort of assuming their role, which has been there for a fairly long time. And so, what did Trump do? In fact, you'll be surprised that we were amongst the few people who were sort of seeing Trump, and we in fact had a reception in India, in Delhi, that Donald Trump has taken over, and now we'll have a very good kind of situation, not only within USA but also outside in the world. And we gave a reception. Now, what did Trump do? In the initial stage itself, he said that, well, he doesn't agree with certain policies which have been absolutely fundamental, which have been going on for a fairly long time within USA, and successive presidents, right from I've been dealing with George H.W. Bush, Mr. Clinton, George Bush, and Mr. Obama. And I have always found that essential policies have been continuing. That there should be less carbon emission, gradually world should move into zero carbon emission, and USA played a very major part. I was there in the COP21 in Paris, and USA played a significant part in that, absolutely in the background, but talking with individual governments, including ours and China and all, so that we agree. And Paris Accord was a significant accord which brought the world together in very major policies, because with that kind of restriction of carbon emission, it was counterproductive initially to many countries, because they had large thermal resource, and to deliberately move away from thermal energy to renewable energy would be a big problem, because it also is, renewable energy also is disruptive. I, being a votary of renewable energy, I thought it was a marvelous decision which was taken by the world. And India, France, with the help of America, we took a very major decision. Our Prime Minister took and said in that COP21 that we will, in 4 or 5 years, we will move on to 100 gigawatts of solar and 75 gigawatts of wind power. And that was a very significant increase in renewable energy. The second thing, which
2 minutes left. Sorry, I've been told. I've got
which Mr. Trump did was to bring back USA into a protectionist sphere. So after so many years of globalization, the country which had brought in globalization to the world moved away from that. And this created a havoc in the minds of very many people, that what they ought to do in a protectionist environment. The third one was that the rule of law, which could be taken away from the normal way of justice into in Hindi it is said, or in the Indian this thing, the people or the organization which is supposed to protect people cannot be used for bringing harm to the people. So this is a very, very important sort of sphere in the rule of law. Now, all these areas, I'm sure that we are going to see significant changes, and from both the sides of Democrats or Republican, there's enough people who are going to, who are much more reasonable and going to do that. So 1 year hence, you will find that USA edging on towards its original sort of strength. And I think, Cleo, if you allow 2 years, you'll find much more normalcy in the world in that period. Thank you very much. And I'd like to say something else later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. And I appreciate not only just sort of the breadth of the coverage, but also the optimism and the faith and the strength of democracy and rule of law, and the importance of underlying that that's something that isn't as widespread as we may think it is, and how valuable and precious it is, and how we really need to keep an eye on it. Thank you, sir, and we'll come back. So we'll go through the other speakers. I will, I'm getting sort of organizational messages about what to do. So the interventions are kind of initial ones, at least 8 minutes each. And if you want, I was requested by His Excellency to give a 2-minute warning. And if anybody else wants a 2-minute warning, I'm happy to do that as well. So I'll just come in, 2 minutes before the end is up, and okay, great. And that'll give you time to wrap up. So next, Mr. Granoff, please take it away. Good to see you again.
Well, first I want to thank Tiku for all the hard work that he's put in to bring us together. And bringing people together to share ideas is part of the vaccine for the disease of social disruption. The United States is facing the largest stress test of its fundamental institutions that it has faced since the Civil War. And it's largely around what was the cause of the Civil War, which was the racism that was a disease when the country began. And the Civil War was a battle that addressed that. And much of the disruption that we've just faced behind the background of the chatter is just pure prejudice and racism. That's the passion. When Donald Trump said, "Make America great again," what he meant was make America white again. If the mob that invaded the Capitol had been people of color, they wouldn't have gotten past the first steps. They would have been shot. That's the reality. But how have we met the stress test? What are the institutions that have had to step in? First and foremost, 60 cases were brought into our legal system. And our court system and the rule of law held firm. And that included judges that Donald Trump had appointed. That included judges from the most, I can't call them conservative because they're not, radical institutions like the Federalist Society. Those judges said, you can't come into our court unless you have facts. We will not allow mythology to govern our legal system. And that went from local courts all the way up to the Supreme Court. The last case that was brought by the Trump supporters to the Supreme Court was summarily thrown away within an hour. It took them an hour just to sit down and get their papers in order. They said, you don't even have standing. So the court system, the legal system has held firm. We're seeing the legislative bodies hold firm. Second time in our history, this president's been impeached. Half the impeachments in our whole history are with this one president. The legislative system is standing up. And we're going to see the legislative system function far more professionally and effectively in the next coming years, because it will be governed by science, it will be governed by facts, and it will be governed by the quest to take care of the people's needs. And last but not least, and of equal importance in the stability of the state, because the state, as we know, has the monopoly of violence, the monopoly of the use of force, is our military. And I'm proud to say that the Joint Chiefs of Staff this week came out and said we will give no quarter to sedition. And the US military is now going to be headed by a Secretary of Defense, a man of color. And he's going to wipe out the white nationalists, the virus in our military. Not our military, there's pockets of this disease of racism. We've just seen 4 years of a president who has not just broken with the law, he's gone deeper than that. He's broken with modernity. One of the most important things in governance in modernity is the implicit social contract that the legitimacy of those who govern comes from those whom they are governing. And that social contract involves accountability, honesty, transparency. And he has rejected those principles. He's undermined the premise that the United States is the first country founded on the rule of law. We're the first country founded purely on a legal instrument, the Constitution. He has completely ignored the principle of the separation of powers, the checks and balances. He's challenged it. He's challenged Article 6, Clause 2 of the Constitution, making treaties the supreme law of the land, by his total derogation of the importance of the United Nations system, which is the UN Charter is a fully ratified treaty. Look at the appointments that he's made to be our UN representative. It's shameful. He's rejected one of the great benefits of the modern world, which is science, and the fact that there is an objective set of rules to understand the natural world. I don't think science is sufficient for human transcendence and spiritual awakening, very important for, certainly in India, a society grounded in traditions of wisdom. But I must say the United States also has a tradition of the pursuit of personal excellence and virtue. Science is not good for the pursuit of virtue, but it's good for understanding the natural world. And we've just had 4 years of a president who has neglected the importance of science. The consequence of that is backsliding on climate and, of course, the horrific scourge of the pandemic. The disease of ignorance, prejudice, and falsehood is as severe as the disease of COVID-19. But the vaccine for it is going to come back, which is the principles of human rights, the principles of moving toward a nuclear disarmed world, the principles of sustainable development, and most important, the principle of the equality of every human being and the dignity inherent in our human birth. Those principles are very real to the incoming president of the United States, and the world will have leadership again from a country that has a duty to uphold the principles upon which it is founded. The vaccine is known. The vaccine is known. We all have to take it because we've seen the disease.
Thank you very much. It's I appreciate you taking time. Sorry about this, and it's also nice to have yet more optimism during this discussion about how resilient the pillars of American democracy are and how many aspects of it are holding firm and will support what's coming ahead. Now to get back to the geopolitics, we have Ambassador Bambawale, who knows the geopolitics of all of this extremely well, having been on the front line and having had to deal with many of the actors, malign and otherwise, who look to every advantage to try to advance their own interests. And so, if you're ready to enlighten us about for 8 minutes about what's going on, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you so much, Ms. Pascal, and it's a great pleasure to be with everyone at the Global Counterterrorism Council once again. Thank you for inviting me. I'm going to talk for, I believe, less than 8 minutes, so I don't think you'll have to give me a warning. I've got exactly 4 points to make, and I'm going to make them quickly and as coherently as possible. I think, you framed the question very well, that 1 year from the 6th of January, which was when we saw those events and the pictures coming from Capitol Hill, what is geopolitics going to look like? And my short answer to that is that there are going to be reinforcements of the trends which are already evident and which we have all seen, studied, analyzed in great detail over the last few years. And what are those trends? And those are my 4 main points. The first is, of course, the event of 6 January on Capitol Hill. While it was sad to see even here in India, for all of us who believe in democracy, and many of the previous speakers have made that point, I believe is one event in a larger process, which is that the United States of America has huge domestic internal problems and issues. And over the past few years, and increasingly in the future, the US is going to turn inward to correct those problems and correct those issues. And I'm sure the next president, President Biden, is going to be going to have his hands full with that. So that's point number one, that the US is facing huge domestic issues, a manifestation of which we saw on the 6th of January on Capitol Hill. But there are economic problems, there are social problems, there are political problems. And to correct those problems, and I have great respect for democracy in the United States and for democracies everywhere, including here in India. I believe that the United States will, in fact, reimagine and reinvent itself in the coming years. So that is one of the large developments which has happened over the past few years and which will get reinforced over the next 1 year. The inward focus of the United States. The second development, of course, is the rise and continuing rise of China. And that is going to continue post-pandemic and post-6th January. We are going to see an increasingly aggressive China. We're going to see an increasingly assertive China. We're going to see a China which wants to play an increasingly important role in the global system. And as a result of that, point number 2 is that the competition between the United States and China will continue to be seen 1 year from now and will perhaps even get enhanced in the months towards 2022 and beyond. So the US-China competitive relationship is something which will dominate geopolitics, and many countries across the globe will have to choose on which side they are. Which brings me to point number 3, which is that the focus of this competition between the United States and China will happen in the Indo-Pacific, which is where it is already happening, but the Indo-Pacific will continue to be the area of competition between freedom on the one hand and authoritarianism on the other. And this is a trend which we have seen in the last few years and which is going to continue well into the next year and even beyond. And in that regard, I must confess that I am delighted to see that there are news reports. I don't think the announcement has been made as yet, but the new president, President Biden, is thinking of appointing an Indo-Pacific coordinator in the National Security Council in the person of Mr. Kurt Campbell, with whom I used to deal with when he was Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia and the Pacific. But this is a good signal, and all of us in Asia, beyond India too, believe that Kurt has the capabilities to focus US attention on the Indo-Pacific, even as she reinvents and reimagines herself domestically. So that's point number 3. And my last point, and I think I'll finish well inside your 8 minutes, Ms. Pascal, is what is going to happen between India and the United States. And there, once again, I would say that the trend line of the last few years is going to get accelerated or further strengthened, which is there's going to be greater competition amongst these two major, there's going to be greater cooperation between these two major democracies of the world. Not only do we share the same values, but from those shared values, we increasingly find that our interests across the globe are increasingly convergent. And therefore, I see greater cooperation between the big democracies in the world, definitely India and the United States, but also other countries like Japan, Australia, Western Europe, Canada, etc. So I think these are the 4 big trends which will get accelerated in the post-6-1 period. And I think that this is how geopolitics is going to pan out over the coming year, as you had asked. Thank you very much. I hope I finished in time.
Thank you. Yes, you did. In fact, you finished 2 minutes early, so I'm going to not let you run away immediately. I'm going to ask you a very quick question because, in fact, I think Kurt Campbell has been announced. And of course, so this is a similar team in place as what was in place during Scarborough Shoal in 2012. So the question is, do you think that given everything that you've described, the increasing role of the Indo-Pacific, the U.S. focus on the area, the rise of China, do you think this team would behave differently now to a Scarborough Shoal type incident than it did in 2012 or 2016?
The way I look at it, Ms. Pascal, is that China has actually become increasingly aggressive over the past years. And if you look around the periphery of China today, it is very aggressive with its own people, whether in Hong Kong or in Xinjiang. It's very aggressive with its neighboring countries like India or Japan, or in the South China Sea with ASEAN, and even in the Taiwan Straits. So I think, this aggressiveness and this growing assertiveness of China will have to be met with a coalition of countries, which I had referred to earlier. It could be the Quad, as we call it in the Indo-Pacific, but it will be a group of democracies across the globe, which will band together, get together, to meet the challenge of greater assertiveness. Not just the rise of China. The rise of China, if peaceful, would be okay, but the greater aggressiveness of China as she rises further. And if that creates a problem, then the democracies are going to get together to tackle this problem.
Thank you very much. I appreciate you taking the exact 8 minutes and dealing with a concrete case. And it's the sort of concrete case that actually our next speaker, General Ratnayake from Sri Lanka, has to deal with all the time, because this issue of democracies in China and the role of the U.S. is very present in his day-to-day life, including I don't know whether the general is still helping manage COVID. But if you have any thoughts, sir, on what is happening in the U.S. in terms of the sixth, in terms of the new administration, where we'll be in a year, how things might change, would be greatly appreciated. Thank you so much. Good to see you again.
Yes, yes. Can you hear me loud and clear? I just joined.
Yes, sir.
Can you? Yeah. Sorry about it, and thank you for the opportunity, and especially thank our friend Aditya for getting me. So I will also not go past 7-8 minutes, and I have a very brief. So let me start. This is a very serious act as far as we are concerned from this part of the world, and also from the world point of view, it is very serious as how we see it. So, according to what I saw in media on Trump supporters joining together at Capitol Hill last Wednesday and storming into congressional the other day, and storming into congressional offices by force and vandalizing all what they found on their way, tell us many things on many issues today. First, about democracy, if I may speak a few words. Sri Lanka is supposed to be one of the oldest democracies in Asia, and our people as a nation, irrespective of ethnicity, race, and religion, have been able to survive in democracy despite a 30-year internal armed conflict, 2 insurrections, and an armed conflict, attempted military coup in late 60s. Our elections have been very peaceful throughout. The elections have been there since late 1920s. So, the transfer of state power from the defeated political party to the winning political party has always been very, very peaceful. We are not a rich nation, and in the Western terminology, we are from the third world. And interestingly, third world is characterized by the Western media being undemocratic and unruly, in spite of the things that I just mentioned a while ago. Hence, the point is that democracy is not here. If you look at, we all know that the point I want to make is democracy is not an Asian, and it is, of course, Western. Our British colonial rulers robbed everything from us for centuries and left. Even though colonial rule was bad, we found democracy is good, and we continue in democratic traditions. However, what the West has been failed However, what the West has been failed to exclude is the white supremacy in other democratic traditions. This discharge of violence at the Capitol Hill buildings in the US is against the rightful democratic victory of a political opponent. Ironically, the President Trump and Republicans his own political party members incite rioters. White supremacy is in the American history throughout. Sadly, it is still readily available in American politics even today. Imagine all the protesters were African American. Surely news stories and other media reportage would have been totally different. Second, it was not a protest. Even it is a bit difficult to characterize as a riot. It was kind of a crime. It's basically kind of terrorism. So up to now, 5 people have died, and the crime scene is the Capitol Hill buildings, where US passed bills of billions of dollars for defense. US has been failed to defend the place where they pass defense bills. President Trump seems to have gone seriously wrong in this pledge of making America great again. USA is one of the oldest democracies in the world, but now it is threatened not from outside, but within. The US power projection towards the rest of the world is explicitly said to have been associated with the promotion of democracy. The Capitol Hill incident will go to the annals of US history as another black mark. In fact, American history is repeating, and so the white supremacy is continuing. Political implications on US national security and international security is still not clear, but Capitol Hill incident is a clear security breach and a clear indication of white supremacy. Further, democracy upholds freedom of expression and liberty. However, this act is neither freedom of expression nor liberty. Americans waving American flags while attacking symbols of American democracy on American soil, incited by the American president. What an irony in a liberal democracy. Institutions in the US liberal democracy are failing. I have my doubts betting on institutions by the US on sustainability of liberal democracy. The US now need to build good humans and not institutions to save the democracy in their own home. So this is basically what I've got to say very briefly. So I will stop here if you have any questions. The only thing I'm sorry, I got to leave within next 5-10 minutes. So if you have anything, I can still.
Okay, well, thank you, sir. Thank you very much for that.
Answer.
You're also 2 minutes under, so perfect. So I'm just going to ask you just a very quick question. A year from now, do you think the relationship between Sri Lanka and the US will be different than it was a year ago? And if so, why?
I don't think even though the US policy towards Sri Lanka has always been, whether it's Democrats or the Republican, that has not been so much change. So I hope the same would continue. Basically, not much of a change I expect from the policy-wise.
Okay, and do you think that because obviously you're in a very tricky position with things like the Japan-India port coming in and the existing Sri Lankan port, so you're really at the front line of a lot of these little changes. Do you think that Chinese behavior will change according to a new administration in the US?
Um, we have been our policy basically have been very clear. The present government is working on keeping the friendly relationship with all the countries around the world, especially with the big powers. And our Chinese relationship has always been basically based on commercial activities. So therefore, we have a very clear understanding about our policy, but certain parts when they say that, especially from the American side, US side, they say we have too much involvement. The Chinese are getting too much involved here. But very openly, we have been discussing this point with the Americans or the Indians and other parties. So therefore, I don't think that the change of policies towards it from the Sri Lankan point of view will be there, but the same thing would continue. It is not very friendly as far as the Chinese involvement, the US attitude towards Sri Lanka is concerned, but we continue to engage with them and getting more and more closer, if possible. That would be the ideal thing from the Sri Lankan point of view.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your patience with the impolite questions and for your time in today. I know you've been very busy, and we truly appreciate getting your perspective and hearing.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, now we move on to Dr. Schindler, an expert again in all sorts of instability potentials, and look very much forward to it. I'll give you a 6-minute warning, so I'll give you a warning 2 minutes to the end. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. You can hear me okay, I hope?
Can hear you perfectly.
Yes, perfect, fantastic. Well, thank you so much for inviting me for today. So, after the first couple of presentations, it concerned the cockpit of strategic geopolitics. I want to take you back to the machine room of counterterrorism, and in a 3-step short briefing. One, I will characterize the event and based on what we know right now from court documents and incidents, and that my organization, the Counter Extremism Project, is monitoring. Secondly, I will look at the wider threat, and third, I will look at the current challenges that we are encountering in meeting this threat and that need to be met in the next 12 to 18 months. First of all, what was this incident? So it was not a spontaneous demonstration, as already was pointed out. It was also not just general supporters of President Trump, but it was the crowd was interceded with several networks, such as the Proud Boys and the Boogaloo movement, as well as other groups from the alt-right. So as a result, the violence was not spontaneous or an eruption of anger. It was pre-planned and very deliberate in large parts. And this demonstrated the challenge that arose really and grew quite heavily, both in the United States as well as in Europe, in the last few years. I just wanted to remind everyone, if you haven't heard that there was a great enthusiasm among extreme right-wing circles in Germany for the storming of the Capitol, because a couple of months ago they tried to do the same thing with the German Parliament building, and they are now gearing up for a repeat of that. The problem with the US administration the past few years was not that it actively encouraged and nurtured those networks, but that the pushback from the US president was simply not there, and when he was asked repeatedly to do so, he always shied away, most famously calling for the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by, which is not exactly a pushback as you would imagine a US president to do. This allowed these networks to fester, and also allowed these networks to really arm themselves long before the presidential election. It was clear that lines is going to erupt if the presidential elections would not go in one direction. Therefore, and then last point on the characterization of the incident, I want to point out that this threat is not over. There is a continuing threat starting from this weekend on all 50 state capitals for armed incidents, as well as DC itself. I'm sure you've seen all of the pictures of the National Guard with arms now actually sleeping inside the Capitol. And there are numerous threats personally against a member of Congress, against state and local officials, as well as senators who may or may not vote to impeach Donald Trump. So this is the characterization of the threat, and it's really a rather unsurprising but very public display of what we characterize in the CEP, in the Counter Extremism Project, as the emerging threat of a transnational right-wing extremist movement that is transatlantically linked. And we just finished in November, right on time, a large research project looking at this transatlantic network, both in the US and the EU. It is really characterized by a linking through common narratives, why genocide, the great replacement, you know, this is what the rhetoric of the crowd on the 6th of January also played into the fear that you are going to get replaced by people who do not look like you, and the conclusion that it's now progressed so far that you have to employ violence to stop it. Secondly, it's linked through international travel. There are network hubs, festival, MMA events, conferences, where both US and European right-wing extremists meet up, exchange experiences, arrange training in paramilitary training camps, sometimes in Eastern Europe, sometimes in the US. So it's linked through travel, and it has seen, by and large, COVID-19 as a great advantage in that it ramped up its online activities, networked even stronger online, and tried to overtake those movements, both in the United States as well as in Europe, that are critical of COVID countermeasures to widen its approach and appeal. It is quite on a broad financial backing compared to Islamist terrorism. Our estimate is that in Germany alone, proceeds from festival M&A events of the violent extreme right-wing milieu alone, plus online and offline expenses, generate a turnover of several million euros per year. So we are not talking about a small-scale financial basis here. 3 pillars: festivals, income from online and offline sale of now specially branded clothes, as well as paraphernalia, including in cryptocurrencies, and of course donations both on and offline, give about a couple of million per year to play with. It is totally geared towards violence. All violence, as you have already also heard on the 6th of January, is always defensive. So there's always this imaginary threat that needs to be stopped, and violence needs to be employed. On January 6th, it was stop the steal, but it's also stop immigrants, stop the transfer of our societies. The terror attacks were mostly until now conducted by individuals. If you look through the sad history since 2019, Christchurch, Halaha now, as well as the killing of politicians, always individuals who had done the terror attack. On January 6th, you actually saw a first impression since Breivik, and a couple of incidents in the early and late 90s were actually an organized, what we would characterize an organized terrorist incident existed. The online space has already been discussed in the previous session quite extensively, so I'm not going to elaborate very much on this. Is, however, integral part to the movement, both on social media as well as specifically designed platforms that are instrumental to its transnational connectivity prior to COVID and will be important after COVID. There are important national and multilateral regulations that are going on the European Union side, the TCO, the Terrorist Content Online Directive, the Digital Service Act, which is going to reorganize how internet is going to be used on all kind of trades as well as social media platforms inside the European Union. NetzDG, and given the events and the importance of social media, has played, and the discussion now with banning of Donald Trump and the already ongoing court cases against Facebook for its monopoly position. The expectation is that also in the US, internet regulation and regulation of social media is going to make a step forward. What does this mean now for the US administration and the transatlantic or international community in countering these threats? There are really 3 challenges, and the work has already begun on those. First is a conceptual challenge. Violence from the right, by and large, is still characterized as extremism, not as terrorism, while counterterrorism measures that are in place require a prior qualification as terrorism. The US administration, this actual US administration, took a first step with the sanctioning of the Russian imperial movement in April last year, so you can't blame them for not doing anything. But the problem is there is no legal mechanism at the moment to list inside the US domestic terror groups. So you don't have that instrumentarium yet. And on the EU side, you have the instruments, but no extreme right-wing and violent groups are yet to be listed, listed on the EU terror list. So you need to make that conceptual leap that says violence perpetrated by this ideology is the same violence that is perpetrated by other ideologies. If we are calling other ideologies violence terrorism, then this needs to be called terrorism. Second is a practical challenge. Thank you. Second is a practical challenge. There is not really a good data set on violence structures and financing of this wider transnational movement, especially its transnational connections, that makes the threat assessment a little bit more complicated than it would be or is on the Islamist side. And the third one is the operational challenge. So far, extreme right-wing and violent extreme right-wing is seen individually by those countries as domestic threats. Therefore, there is no focus yet on the external intelligence service, on the transnational connections. So we need to really get over the silos between domestic and foreign intelligence and security to better understand the full aspect of these threats. But what happened on the 6th of January was primarily a US issue, but it is born out of a wider ecosystem that has grown, and its transnational connections is an important part of why the 6th of January went the way it went. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Doctor. That was very, very helpful. Yeah, really useful to have a kind of practical breakdown. A super quick question about these networks that you're describing. I'm from Quebec, and we had a violent terrorist movement in the early 70s, the Front de Libération du Québec. And what we found was that there were international linkages with groups that you might not associate with them because they had another goal, which was to destabilize Canada as a whole. So are you finding with these white nationalists, or however you want to categorize them, terrorist groups, that there are other state actors who are backing them in any way in order to gain strategic advantage?
If you're talking about material support or financial support, not much evidence. Obviously, as far as the US is concerned, obviously there's the very famous case of the Russian imperial movement's training camps outside St. Petersburg that were used by members of the Nordic resistance movement, which is a transnational Nordic movement in all Nordic countries, to prepare those members for a string of bomb attacks, actually bomb attacks in Sweden in 2015 and 16. Within the US, of course, you do see the aim of disruption by state actors such as, for example, and primarily Russia, to undermine the cohesion of society by affording, pushing right and alt-right narratives through social media channels by, employing bots, outsmarting the algorithms that you discussed in the last session. So it is more a immaterial support of rather than money and training capabilities and weapons that may be forwarded. It's more on that side that you see meddling of state actors. So their aim is not to further right-wing movements from the Russian side. The primarily aim is to sow discord. And if the left-wing movement would have fostered as much as the right-wing movement, I'm quite sure Russia would have no hesitation to do the same thing for other violent movements inside America.
Thank you very much. That's a very helpful link from the mechanics room to the cockpit, or how we correctly phrased it. Heading back to our how this may affect India and some of the larger strategic issues involved and what happened on the day. We're very lucky to have Dr. Batra with us. I hope. I can't see him yet, but sir, are you there?
Well, he will be joining very shortly. We can have Mr. Joshipura.
Mr. Joshipura, are you ready, sir?
Yes, absolutely, Cleo.
Thank you very much. Take it away. I'll give you a warning at 6 minutes. Thank you.
Please do. Please do. And you can hear me okay, I gather?
Can hear you perfectly, sir. Go ahead.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thanks, Cleo, and thank you, Aditya, for inviting me to be part of this event. Delighted to be on a panel with such esteemed speakers. 4 seems to be a popular number of the day. I know Ambassador Gotham Bambawale said that he had 4 points. Well, I too have 4 points, and I'll be quick in making them. Let me just summarize what my 4 points are before I go into the details of each of them. My first point is that I think there's no question that America's credibility has taken a beating around the world after the events of the 6th of January. And I'll elaborate on each of these as I move forward. My second point is that I believe that US-India ties will continue their steady upward trajectory. My third point is that the diaspora, which is often not spoken about as much in policy events such as this one, is a huge source of strength in the relationship. And my last point, which was made by Gautam, but which I will elaborate on a little bit differently, is that the Biden administration's focus will be to a large extent inward because of the work that needs to be done here in America, which is not to rule out the importance of foreign policy in any way, shape, or form, but I'll get to that a little bit later. So back to my first point about America's credibility having taken a beating. I think there's no question at all that as a global standard bearer of democracy, that we like to see ourselves as, and that we have been seen as here in America, that role, that sort of position on the rostrum has diminished a little bit after the 6th of January, and considerably in the eyes of several, judging from the comments that one has read about from several global leaders. The problem is that in the past 4 years, it's arguable, of course, and the argument is ongoing, as you know, as we speak in the U.S. Congress, that laws have been broken. But democracy is not just laws; it's also norms, and various norms have been shattered in the past 4 years. Unfortunately, it pains me to say this as an American, but there's no point being like an ostrich with your head burrowed in the sand. I mean, you've got to wake up and smell the coffee, as they say, and it's high time that we do the hard work that is needed for a renewal in terms of our standing in the democratic world. Coming to U.S.-India ties, I think it's quite evident if you look at U.S.-India ties over the past several administrations, whether it's Trump, Obama, Clinton, George H.W. Bush, Clinton, etc., several administrations, George W. Bush, that over time they have been on an upward trajectory. I mean, you look at defense as just one example. Whether you talk about bilateral defense deals between the US and India, which are now gradually increasing and picking up speed after a long pause in terms of procurement delays and procurement wrangles and so forth between the countries. One is the bilateral side. The other that I think was already discussed by Gautam was the Quad, the quadrilateral arrangement between India, America, Japan, and Australia. And I recognize, of course, that it's just because there's this Quad grouping, which is meant to serve, although they may not say it, is meant to serve as a bulwark, a strategic bulwark against China. I mean, as you know, Cleo, foreign policy, defense policy is always undergirded by a strategic foreign policy, and here the foreign policy, I think, is to strengthen the alliance of democracies. But this is not to be Pollyannish and suggest that the Quad is something that will be on autopilot, so to speak, or auto glide without significant amount of work being done by the four countries. It will take a lot of work because even within those countries, among themselves, and in terms of their own relationships vis-a-vis China, there are significant differences. Just as one example, I mean, you look at Australia, China is a very large trading partner of theirs as compared to what India-China trades. So, there are issues that will have to be dealt with among the Quad, but it's heartening to know that this is an alliance that is gaining steam. And in fact, they're talking about a Quad plus with eventual groupings of, to include Vietnam and South Korea and so on and so forth, which will bring its own complications, but it's good to know that the conversations have started. Also, vis-a-vis China, I think there's no doubt that given the Chinese incursions into Indian territory in the recent past, that the time for India to make a more clear strategic choice is upon them. And I think that India will more overtly lean towards America than they have in the past. So that bodes well for the relationship as well. There's also a lot of collaboration that's occurring on the innovation front in terms of economic innovation, entrepreneurship, all of those kinds of areas. That has always been a strength, a thread that ties the two democracies together, at least over the past couple of decades. And I see that only increasing. So I guess my point here is that the steady, the solid, the important work and the hard work, but perhaps the less glamorous work of building the US-India relationship brick by brick, or maybe the right terminology is bite by bite, will continue under the Biden administration. The one point that I'd like to make is that, you know, India will not be an exigent issue in foreign policy. And by that, I mean India will not present an urgent and imminent crisis for America.
2 minutes.
Okay, thank you. And in that regard, I think that, you know, America's attentions may be drawn elsewhere, you know, while the work with India is continuing behind the scenes. My next point is about the diaspora. So the diaspora is a huge source of strength, as I mentioned, from my role as the executive director of Diaspora. It is a huge source of strength in the relationship and has been for, you know, 3 or 4 decades now, if not more. And that will continue. That, by the way, refers not just to the US and India, but also multilaterally with other countries, whether it's Canada, where you are, Cleo, and where I had the pleasure of studying for 2 years in the early 2000s, or whether it's the UK, whether it's, you know, Australia, the UAE, what have you, various countries. Also, the rise of Indian American politicians, and I don't just mean Kamala Harris, but politicians across all levels of government, federal, state, local, and indeed in the appointed executive branch. That also is viewed by pride, I think, in both countries. Lastly, the point about the inward-focused administration. You know, given all the work that needs to be done here in America with COVID recovery, both from the health crisis and the economic crisis, the fact that America is riven by racial strife, the economic inequalities that are only being exacerbated, and so on and so forth, educational pathways, healthcare access, all of those things. I think President-elect Biden and Vice President-elect Harris have a lot of work to do internally here in America. And I think Biden has said on the campaign trail that he will be focusing inward. Now, that is not to say that foreign policy cannot intervene. I know that there's a seasoned team of diplomats, as was alluded to earlier, that is going to be taking charge of foreign policy. And foreign policy has a way of sneaking up on you when you least expect it sometimes. And so, you know, I know that it'll be sort of an all-hands-on-deck approach, and people will be at the tiller ready to take charge in a competent way on foreign policy, specifically on US-India issues, when the new administration takes office. Happy to answer any further questions during the Q&A.
Thank you very much. That's very helpful view. And like you, I may have been in Canada for a while, but as you might be able to see over my shoulder, I've now shifted to Canada South, which is Florida, which is probably a better place to be in January. So, yeah.
No worries.
Yeah, that was very helpful, and hopefully during the Q&A we'll get back a little bit more to the role that Diaspora might play in the next administration, in the U.S. administration, because it's very, very important point brought up, very critical. Now, has Dr. Batra joined us? I did yet?
I guess still not. Maybe we can have him in the middle, so we can go with the Q&A.
Hooray! All right, everybody's behaved to time, and we've got time for the Q&A, so that's even better. We're going to go back through the panel in the same order that we went through it before. There are a couple of questions for specific people. The Honorable Shekhar Dutt and Ambassador Bambawale have specific questions, so I'll mention those. If you don't have a specific question from the participants, and you'd like to respond to anything that anybody else has said on the panel, that'd be very interesting. And again, if you feel like focusing 1 year out and what geopolitical shifts there may or may not be, that would be helpful. I think for this first round of questions, if we could stick to about 3 minutes per answer, and I'll give you a notice at the 1 minute mark. How's that? We're trying a new GCTC protocol here. So the first question for His Excellency Mr. Shekhar Dutt, as well as Ambassador Bambawale, if he wants to get to it later, is from Nayan Chandra Mishra. It says, as we know that somewhere India's foreign policy is tilting towards the US and its allied countries, how will it impact India's interests in the long term, especially at this point in time where we are moving away from our traditional allies? The USA is showing sign of weakness, which we will not see immediately, but in the long term. So there are some assumptions in the questions. If you question the assumptions, great, go ahead. Otherwise, answer the question as it is. Sir, would you like to go ahead?
Uh, so shall I start? I think, traditional allies include USA, because USA has been, for a fairly long time, a very large sort of people-to-people contact with USA. And so Indians have a feeling of being quite familiar with USA. And then, of course, since 1991 and beyond, I mean, I was instrumental in getting US-India defense strategic framework negotiated and discussed. And after that, immediately we had US-India, the nuclear deal. Now, all these brought India very close to getting into a strategic relationship with USA, and I think that's very good, because it helps both the countries. And I don't think India's relationship with USA is going to be at cost with any other traditional allies. We have also huge relationship with our software scientists and the American software industry, or the entire industry which depends upon software. And in fact, Silicon Valley, as you know, has a very large Indian participant. But even more than that, Indians or Indian companies in India are constantly sort of engaging in not only activities but also very large projects with the US companies. And so as this happens, I think the question about the Quad is a bit this thing, because Quad presupposes that the interests of Japan or Australia would be so much that they could jeopardize their relationship with China. And I just want to sort of put that Japan's export to China is $144 billion. Japan's export to USA is $140 billion. So Japan exports more in terms of value, more to China. Similarly, Australia exports to China $87 billion and to Japan $41 billion. Now, both these countries have sizable export dealings with China, and it has to be seen how much they can say put to risk by losing this trade with China. And so we have to have, therefore, Indian say partnership with USA becomes far more important. And I'm sure that with the strategic relationship we're going to have, as we were, moving into technology collaborations and all those things in defense, I think it will be very useful, and we will have much more dealings with USA. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That's very helpful, and it's useful to remind me of the critical economic component when talking about strategic issues. And what will happen with the Quad is, of course, of great interest to us all, and perhaps it can broaden out to some more economic cooperation as opposed to just strategic. I know that that's been discussed, and as you say, because you're part of it, the U.S.-India relationship is very deep and growing deeper. So that bilateral within that quadrilateral is strong, and we'll see what happens with the rest of it. Thank you, sir. Ambassador Bambawale, you have that question if you want it, and you also have another question from Yurav Singh, which is, will increasing boycott of China by world powers increase or decrease China's aggressiveness? So again, the question has an implicit assumption in it. So now talk about the question or answer it as you will. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Ms. Pascal. Let me take the first question first. The one which focuses on India's non-alignment or strategic autonomy. And I'm happy that question has been raised because many in India seem to believe that non-alignment or strategic autonomy of our policy is an end in itself. And I'm afraid that is not true. It's a means to an end. And the end itself is actually maintaining, promoting, and protecting our national interests. And if protecting and promoting our national interests, especially in the present geopolitical climate, involves getting closer to the United States, then so be it. And as Mr. Shekhar Dutt has rightly pointed out, that it is India has been close to the US in the past. We have been close to other countries in the past. But in the current situation, we cannot take on China on its own, and therefore we need a global balancing coalition. And India should definitely be a part of that. And don't forget that protecting our national interests is the end goal that we seek, not the shibboleth or the holy cow of maintaining our non-aligned status or strategic autonomy. So that's my answer to the first question. The second question itself is, as far as the world is concerned, definitely there is a trade and technology competition happening between what we can describe as the free world on the one hand and the authoritarian world on the other. There's no doubt about that. But I think even in the current situation where the world is trading with China, is transacting with China, is exchanging with China, she has not hesitated to show her aggressive nature and her assertive nature. And therefore, I think we have to factor that into our decision making, that even exchanging or dealing or talking to China is not going to reduce her assertiveness and aggressiveness. And in fact, there may be a point of time in the near future where, as I said earlier, the democracies of the world will have to find a way to tackle the China problem, if I can call it that. So I'll stop there, Ms. Pascal. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you very much. That was
Leo,
great.
we have Anurag Batra.
Dr. Batra, I know you're just jumping in, but are you ready for your 8 minutes? The protocol is after 6 minutes. I'll give you a 2-minute warning. And we can't hear you. We'd love to hear you. Still
can you hear me now?
Yes, perfectly.
Okay.
Thank you.
If I finish in 5 minutes, is there a prize or something?
There absolutely is. There's
He said some Chinese manufactured goods will show up at my home, and I can see Governor Dutt smiling and chuckling. Always good to see him. And today is a very auspicious day. It is the new harvesting season, and it is the Hindu calendar. It is the start of a new year. So happy New Year, and it's an auspicious day, and we're 6 days away from President-elect Joe Biden's swearing in, and we may be a couple of days away from the second time impeachment of Donald Trump. Now it's in the hands of one person who has to decide that what he wants to do, Mitch McConnell. But coming back to Biden, first of all, before the election, it was built that Biden is to influence Indian votes, that Biden is anti-India, he's very pro-China, and because of the situation on the border, there is an anti-China feeling in India. So there was a way to drum up support from the Indian community for Joe Biden by portraying him as more pro-China. Now, let me say, I'm not an expert on strategic affairs, but as somebody who understands this, who watches this, who does keep a keen eye on it. First of all, India's bilateral relationship with America is bipartisan. it does not matter which party comes. We have a very strong relationship in trade, in defense. We cooperate on technology. And on most issues in the world, we have a similar voice. Okay, we are both democracies. We both have a very strong judicial system, and most importantly, I wouldn't say China is the enemy of both, but in some way we have to engage. Both have to engage with China. China is definitely a frenemy. It's a friendly enemy, so to say. So we have a shared history of collaborating on common causes, whether they're commerce, industry, or even in terms of geopolitical issues. And so first of all, I want to say that even with a democratic president, we shouldn't worry. Second, again, as I said, election rhetoric is election rhetoric. Once you are the head of a state, especially you are the president of the United States, you have leeway, but the leeway is very limited. It's a very limited leeway. Also, with the elections in Kashmir, one of the things was the vice president-elect Kamala Harris was part of a group of politicians from the US who had made some comments on the article being repealed in J&K. With the elections happening, I think at least India can showcase that for the first time there were elections, and it did at the municipal level, at the panchayat level, and it did bring in a certain kind of elected governance which was missing. By and large, also, there's been no major terrorist incidents there. There have been some. So clearly, one of the fears they had was that, internet services have been disconnected. So, there was an attempt to paint Joe Biden and Kamala Harris as anti-India, which is not the case at all. Any American president has to keep in mind the past relationship that America has with India and the potential the relationship has with the number of American companies operating in India, the number of American companies investing in India, India's military cooperation with American defense companies. Yes, we did get a large order from a French supplier, so to say, in terms of Rafale, but by and large, we've been buying a lot of armament from the Americans. So I don't think we need to worry. I think Biden will first of all focus on the pandemic that America is dealing with, his relief plan for the people in the US. I think whether it's a $2,000 check they'd get. So I think Biden's first few months, we can safely assume will go in dealing with what America is grappling with, both a crisis of lives and a crisis of livelihood. In terms of the nuclear policy, in terms of the military and defense cooperation, I don't see any reason why it will get slower. I only expect it to be deeper. I think over the next few years, India will enhance its military capabilities, defense capabilities even more, and some of the American companies may be India's partner in that endeavor. So clearly that will continue. As an economic relationship, our fates are intertwined. Lots of American companies work in India, large investors in lots of startups or unicorns, as we'd like to call them, are American companies. Also, the investments from China slowed down in the last 8-10 months. A lot of American companies came in. You look at the investments in Jio, Mr. Mukesh Ambani raised $22 billion. $22 billion, one single entrepreneur raised. Most of it is from American investors, right? So, clearly, the point I'm trying to make is that Biden is good for America, good for world, good for India, and clearly, I would joke about Trump. and say that my 10-year visa from America has come. I don't need to worry. But clearly, with what has happened in the last 9 days, clearly Trump is good riddance, if I may say it directly. And I think Biden is welcome. And also, there is a catharsis happening in the Republican Party, because just before the riots, you saw Trump Jr. saying that it is now a Republican Party is Donald Trump's Republican Party. He said that. And that's why a lot of Republicans have distanced themselves from Donald Trump, except the ones that feel that by supporting Donald Trump, they are in some way, pandering to the base that Donald Trump has created. So clearly, I think Biden will be focused both economically and in terms of dealing with the pandemic for at least the next few weeks and months domestically. I think his foreign policy focus he's chosen most people that he wanted to choose for his cabinet. And so you will see that no American president, at least in the last 3 decades, have come in. And one of the few things that the American president does is to be able to reinvigorate his, and I say his because America has not had a female president, so I can be safe when I say him, an American president. There's never been a female president. I hope someday we see a female president. Is in reinvigorating his and his country's relationship with India. India is a natural ally of the US, and that will not change. And don't expect too much U-turns. Also, the anti-China policy that Trump seemed to at least, exhibit from outside. What are the results? We must ask, what are the benefits? A lot of people say, oh, the economy did well in Trump's regime. Trump reaped the benefits of what happened in the, American economy organically. I don't think he did things that really, you can say benefited the economy. So I would say, welcome to President-elect Biden. As I said earlier, he's good for the world, he's good for America, and definitely be good for India. We have a very deep relationship. I don't see any change. And again, a lot of people may say that our Prime Minister had a personal chemistry with Donald Trump. Our Prime Minister is very pragmatic. He was among the first few leaders to congratulate Biden when Biden was elected. On the same day, he congratulated President-elect Biden. So I'm sure Prime Minister Modi will be able to build a personal rapport with Biden and carry this relationship forward. So I don't expect surprises. And on whether Biden is pro-China and will he be soft on China, I think by and large the American policy will stay same. However, there may not be bursts on Twitter from the American president, and there may not be a lot of rhetoric. Trump was given to making a lot of rhetoric and making everything personal. Biden is the antithesis of that. He governs with professionals. Look at this, elects for the various positions, and clearly, he's more nuanced in how he will make announcements and decisions. So I think we're dealing with a better quality of administration, better administration who will be nuanced. And I think we must, as a country, be ready to deal with a nuanced America. Because under Donald Trump, none of the issues were nuanced. They were not deeply discussed. They were not deeply debated. And I'm not sure a lot of rhetoric was implemented. So I think when we deal with Biden, we will need more rigor than we needed with Trump as a country.
Thank you. Thank you. It's good to hear the optimism coming out of this panel. Not something that I expected, but very happy to hear. Another question's come in, but I'm not quite sure who it's for. Okay, we'll come back to it. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, today is also Veterans Day in India. which is also a very important, auspicious day. And if we can get this next year or 3 or 4 years right, and hopefully that will benefit everybody, including all of the Indian veterans who kept the country safe for so long. So we'll go back through the order now. So Mr. Granoff, if you have anything you'd like to say, and again, if you'd like to look forward for a year and see and let us know what you think the world might be like then, and how it might be different in terms of the US's relationship to the rest of the world. Again, for the Q&A session, it's 3 minutes, and I'll give you a warning at 2. Thank you.
Good. Thank you. First, we're going to see a resurgence of multilateralism and a resurgence of realism and a reliance on science. We're going to see a refocus on existential threats that are non-ideological because of the reliance on the facts. The facts are that we have to deal with protecting the climate and the oceans because we depend upon them. The fact is that Trump has reinvigorated an arms race, a nuclear arms race, which is a paradox. The more the weapons are perfected, the more they're expanded and modernized, the less security we obtain. Biden has a long history of sophistication in arms control and disarmament issues. The NPT will come up for a critical review in the coming year, and we will see a resurgence of multilateralism and a return to arms control. And we've just been hit with, and no one's talked about it, is the post-traumatic stress that we're going to see on the other side of the vaccine if we're able to, and the realization that all the military expenditures, $1.9 trillion in the world, are not able to deal with the 3 existential threats we face: climate, which is oceans, which is our oxygen, climate, weapons of mass destruction, and pandemics. All require global cooperation. And that's the issue. How are we going to bring China and the United States into a cooperative security thing? It's ironic because in terms of finance and trade, we're already there. But in terms of security paradigms, we're still operating with a military national model. Whereas the stresses that humanity is facing are very real. India and Pakistan each country has 1/3 of their children are malnourished. 70% of the malnourished children in the world are in South Asia. I want to point out that within the next coming years, we're going to see 2 female political leaders talking about India, America, bilaterals. We're going to see 2 very prominent female leaders in America, one with roots and a heritage from Tamil Nadu, and the other, that would be Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States. And the other will be, I predict, the front runner of the Republican Party, Nimrata Radhawa Haley, Nikki Haley. Her roots are from Punjab. So in terms of the culture and in terms of bilaterals, we're going to have 2 prominent female leaders in America with Indian roots. That is going to be an enormous foundation for bridge building in the best of possible ways. But of course, we still have the reality that India rents the Akula submarine at $3 billion, and the Chakra nuclear-powered submarine from Russia. So we're talking about multilateralism and different adversaries. The very fact of the matter is India is renting these submarines from Russia and building military ties with the United States. We have got to come to a new level of human security realism to deal with the existential threats that humanity faces that cannot be dealt with the current paradigm of security. And it's my hope that Joe Biden is certainly going to have people intelligent enough and realistic enough to understand that. Now, whether we can move the security establishments to a realism that deals with these threats, that's the question that India faces, because climate change isn't going away just by hoping for it. It's the challenge of India and every country in the world.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We'll see whether we can put together new approaches if needed, new adaptable approaches.
We don't have a choice, Cleo. Climate is existential, and pandemics are existential, and nuclear weapons are existential. By accident, design, or madness, they're going to get used. and we're talking about subsidiary issues, if we don't focus on those, if we get any one of those three wrong, the consequences are dire. That's it.
Yeah, and we have gotten some of those wrong in the past, hence the entire world is on lockdown because of the pandemic. Thank you. Dr. Schindler, the questions we have in the box are much more, not even just cockpit level, but satellite level. So I'm not sure you want to address those, but you have your 3 minutes to respond to the others, or anything that
Yes.
that you want.
Well, I mean, obviously, if you allow me, I'm speaking from the Berlin office of my organization, so I'd like to give a European view towards the Biden administration, which is a little bit less, great that we're going back to the old times than one may assume, right? So obviously, there was a very, very difficult relationship with President Trump, including, with the country where for 16 years we had a female leader, and even she couldn't manage the relationship very well because it's unmanageable on a personal level. However, what, despite all the chaos, was very clear is that the trend lines that started in the late Bush, early Obama administration as far as foreign policy is concerned had been maintained, surprisingly, by the Trump administration. So the America first on, we're getting our troops out of Iraq, we're getting our troops out of Afghanistan, we no longer want to involve in other military conflicts outside our own region. That trend line, we, from the European perspective, assume is going to continue, which is a massive problem for the European Union, because we are not yet there that we could replace those quite necessary military engagements, because none of those conflicts, Iraq, Afghanistan, have been in any way stabilized in a way that no military engagement would be a realistic option at this point. Secondly, the fault lines on Russia and dealing with Russia and the dealing with China are going to continue, simply because our geostrategic position is very different to the US. I mean, there is not going to be a discussion whether Biden will or will not rescind the sanctions on Nord Stream 2, the big gas pipeline that is strategically important for Europe to actually keep the lights on in our part of the continent. And there's also no hope that the Biden administration would want to offer competitive gas prices to replace gas that we would or would not buy from Russia. So this is a no-win situation for the Europeans that is going to continue. The third one is our approach to China is slightly different, because what the European Union has learned from how the Soviet Union ended is that change through approachment is a far more effective way to actually undermine rising powers than trying to do a purely confrontative approach, which I think the US has been heading for quite some time, because obviously their geostrategic position with the Pacific between them and China is also different from European perspective, where you have Russia in between the two of us. So in that way, while it's going to be more multilateralism, while the discussion with NATO is useful, is going to be ending while we assume that the Paris Accords are going to be rejoined. We hope, although this is going to be much more difficult, the JCPOA, the Joint Plan of Comprehensive Action with Iran, is going to be rejoined by the US administration. The big fault lines are going to exist, and here is the problem of the maybe medium to long-term damage that the Trump administration has done. It has taught European leaders and political systems that fundamental disagreements with the US is not going to be the end of civilization as we know it. When Germany and France opposed the Iraq war, it was seen as a revolutionary movement. Now we just had 4 years where we were basically opposed to every significant foreign policy step that the Trump administration did. And here we are, we're still breathing and are alive. This is a dangerous lesson, because it does give a critical aspect to the alliance that was not there, where, following US foreign policy leadership was an act of faith, in particular in Germany. And that is, I think, no longer the case, and that's not going to be undone with a little bit more multilateralism under Biden. So it is going to be easier, it's going to be more cooperative, it's going to be more multilateral, but it's not going to be as it was at the end of the Obama administration, because there have been, I would say, nearly tectonal shifts in how we actually view each other at this point. All right, that's my 5 cents from Berlin.
Yeah, yeah. I'll take 5 cents. It's a very important question about, you know, whether for many years the main ocean or the transatlantic alliance was the priority, and now it's shifting seemingly to the Indo-Pacific from a U.S. perspective. And as you mentioned, as Europe kind of seems to be going its own way and creating its own policies, not only kind of in its local region but in the Indo-Pacific, whether there will be a divergence, and whether outside players will see that, like China sees that as an advantage to them or not. It's a very important point. Well, if going back down through our list, we'll come to Dr. Batra at the end. That's the thing I'm presenting. But if Mr. Joshipura is still there, I have a question. I don't know. Have you seen the recently declassified U.S. strategic framework for the Indo-Pacific, the Matt Pottinger document that came out a few days ago?
I have not seen that, Cleo, although we did host the Deputy National Security Advisor 4 years ago in the Trump administration in a meeting in New Delhi when she had just released the national security document pertaining to the Indo-Pacific at the time. But I have not seen the most recent one, no.
Okay, so this one that was released showed how important India was to the administration, including things like trying to help India find new energy sources and encouraging India and Japan to work closer together, some of the things that have been mentioned. And so I guess the question is either you can pick a question from the side, or else how do you think, because you mentioned the importance of the diaspora, how do you think the role the diaspora will play over the next year or so will shape the tone of the Biden administration's approach towards India? Will we be going back to a kind of more Obama era tone where there's a lot about Kashmir and things like that, or will it be more of a kind of Trump era tone where it's a lot about China and Quad, or a combination of both, or neither, or maybe my assumptions are wrong?
Well, you know, Cleo, I think the diaspora relationship between America and India is largely apolitical. Someone mentioned in their comments that there's a bipartisan support for the relationship here in America with India, which is indeed true. And don't get me wrong, there are political pressures that the Indian American community exerts on both sides of the aisle here in America, which is as it should be. As American citizens, it is entirely the right of Indian Americans to participate in the political process, and something that, you know, obviously we encourage here in America. But in terms of the relationship with India, you know, I think there's a couple of things. At the governmental level, it's possible that the Biden administration sort of voce behind the scenes quietly does talk to the Indian government about what it sees as problems in you know, Kashmir and so on and so forth. But that, I think, will be very quiet and behind the scenes initially. I do think that the public face of the relationship will be one of tremendous strength and gathering strength across a variety of different areas. That's at the governmental level. Now, having said that, by the way, there's a lot of countries, including India, that can turn around and point to the problems in the US with our democracy, and they wouldn't be incorrect in saying that. But at the diaspora level, which is what your question was geared towards, there are so many different areas where the Indian diaspora plays a crucial role here in America. For example, the Indian diaspora here in America is just about 1% of the population. Having said that, 7% of the doctors in America are Indian or of Indian origin. In terms of academics, when it's deans and, you know, chancellors of universities, provosts and the like, Indian Americans are vastly overrepresented. Also, in terms of the statistics of the median income of ethnic communities, Indian Americans stand at the top here in America. Even when it comes to the average American income overall, Indian Americans earn at least twice and a little bit more than the average American income overall. That's not to say that there are not Indian Americans in this country who are underprivileged and in need of assistance, but these are sort of the overall means that I'm referring to. So in politics, you know, everybody talks about Kamala Harris and now Neera Tanden, who got nominated as the director of the Office of Management and Budget. if she gets confirmed by the US Senate. But in addition to that, beneath the headlines, there were at least 300 Indians or people of Indian origin who ran for elected office at various levels of government in the last election cycle, whether it's federal, state, local, and so forth. So Indians are woven into the fabric of America in a way now that they have never been in the past, and will only get increasingly more so. And that will be an innate source of strength in the relationship between the two countries that outlasts administrations and political philosophies on either side, India or America. So that's what I see moving forward. Just one last quick thing to inject maybe a little bit of fun and conjecture into this discussion, Cleo, if I may. You talked about going 1 year ahead. A lot of the personification of the US-India relationship, at least in India, happens to be in the form of the United States ambassador to India. And we've had some excellent ambassadors in the past. Ken Juster is the current ambassador. Before that, it was Rich Verma. There have been some really good ambassadors from the United States to India, and vice versa, of course. But just if anyone wants to take a shot at this, I have my guesses and my biases. But who will be the next US ambassador to India?
Oh, okay. What are your guesses? And remember, betting is illegal online.
Well, my guesses are I have a couple of people that I know, and so I will admit that I'm biased towards them. And of course, I could be wrong. I have absolutely zero inside knowledge of this process. So there's this old adage that people who talk don't know, and people who know don't talk. So count me in the first category in this regard. But a couple of people that I think would be outstanding because I know them personally. They have a very deep history of ties with India. Is the former Assistant Secretary of State Nisha Biswal under the Obama administration would be one, and another would be the former Assistant Secretary of Commerce, again in the Obama administration, who is now resident in India, is Arun Kumar. He's the CEO now of KPMG India. So just a couple of names, people that I know. I think they'd be great, but I have no inside knowledge.
Thank you very much. It's exciting to think about. One of the issues that the Trump administration had, of course, was there were a lot of ambassadorial posts that were vacant or empty for a period of time. So there'll be a whole new slate of diplomats. I think that Japan hasn't had an ambassador for a while either. So we'll start to see things change, I think. The last person who hasn't had a chance to answer the questions is Dr. Batra, but I think he may no longer be here. Is that correct, Aditya?
Yeah, he's not here. He's
not here. Okay. So what we'll do, if it's okay, we're very, very close to the end, is we'll just do one quick run through the panel. And if there is one thing, and again, I'm sticking to my premise, there's one thing that a year from now you'd like to see have happened or are very worried about happening, then let us know. So we'll go back through in the same order, and just a minute, please. And yeah, is there something you want to have happened, or is there something that you're worried about happening?
Is this in the order of the panelists, or can anyone go?
It is in the order of the panelists. So we'll start with His Excellency Dr. Shekhar Dutt. If you have a thought about a year from now.
You want me to say? Okay. I think the best thing which could happen as far as India is concerned is going back towards normalcy, and that is when we had far more possibilities of India-US increase of trade, increase of relationship in technology know-how, and US instead of receding inwards because of say protectionism, we look forward to US investments in India. And FDI is a very important sector in which Indian growth premises are based. So we want the American industries or organizations to have FDI and thereby production in India, and in the same manner that US investments have been in China earlier. So I think we look forward to that. And in the next, say, 1 year, we would want a good amount of investments coming into India.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, that would certainly be very helpful, including in if we can reduce economic dependency on China and shift some of those supply chains to like-minded allies and partners. That is something worth hoping for. Mr. Granoff, do you have one thing you hope or fear for a year from now?
My hope is that the focus on business as usual will change, because business as usual will not be able to address protecting the climate, the oceans, the nuclear threat, or the pandemic. And my fear is that we will see the continued legitimization of nationalism, populism, and religious bigotry, and the distortion of the religious narrative. But the new cosmopolitan global generation that's grown up with the internet is my hope for the future. The next generation across the world are extraordinarily advanced in their thinking of the ancient Vedic aphorism, "We are one human family." And that's the reality of trade, of culture, of art, of finance, but not the reality of how we view security. So my hope is that we will change and address these real threats and diminish the mythologies that are holding us back.
You are on mute.
I was saying it might take. I'm very hopeful, and it might take more than a year, but certainly something to work towards. Ambassador Bambawale, you have hopes, fear?
Yeah, no, this is a suggestion for Aditya that exactly 1 year from today, let's reconvene this same panel and others and see if any of our predictions have actually come true. So that's a suggestion for Aditya.
And I second it, having not made any predictions at all, so pretty safe. The general had to go off for a meeting, so we're lucky to have Dr. Schindler now. Hopes, fears?
Yeah, my standard answer to the question, what do you wish for, is usually world peace and $1 million. But I'll settle for, progress on the agenda that I laid out. We've been really watching this train coming towards us, i.e. this strengthening movement of extreme violent right-wing movements, both in the US and Europe, as a growing security threat, to the point that earlier last year, the German Interior Minister, who himself is not exactly a liberal person, but a very strong conservative person, deemed this a greater security threat to German internal security than even ISIL is. And we have over 1,000 foreign fighters of Germany still in camps in Iraq and Syria. That shows you what the level of threat has become in the last couple of years. So obviously, I do hope that the agenda that has been laid out on the by the Biden administration will, on this point, will actually be fulfilled. On the comment by Mr. Granoff, I understand the FBI is seized with it, but do not forget, we've now had multiple incidents of actual security personnel serving and veterans being part of this movement. So there is also an internal thinking that needs to be done when you have a combination of extreme right-wing ideas in combination with weapons training. We had the problem in Germany, there is a problem in France, there is a problem in the UK, and there is also the beginning of a glimmer of a problem in the United States if you think about the participation last week on the Capitol.
Thank you, and I'm oddly encouraged that you still want dollars, because I think one of my concerns for a year from now would be the U.S. dollar tanks for whatever reason, and what that'll do to.
I have residency in the US, so I have no choice.
Okay. Well, hopefully it won't be the Germany in the 30s when we have to use wheelbarrows to get our money to buy a loaf of bread. Let's hope $1 million is still $1 million a year from now. Mr. Josh Puri, you're batting cleanup. You've got the last hopes and dreams of the day.
You brought up a good point about the dollar. That's a whole discussion in its own right. That could take another couple of hours. We'll save it for another day, but it's an interesting point. So one thing that I'm not deeply concerned about is the US-India relationship, like I mentioned. I mean, Biden has said that there is no meaningful global challenge that can be solved without India being at the table. And he also said very categorically that his dream is that India and US be the closest of allies moving forward. So that I'm not concerned about. What I am watching closely is a closely divided US Senate literally on a razor's edge. Not just what that means for the pushes and pulls between the left and the right, but also how the pushes and pulls within the left and within the right impact the possibility of legislation moving forward in the Senate. Because that kind of legislation will impact almost everything. I mean, yes, the executive branch and the president has a lot of power in their own hands in regards to foreign affairs, but nonetheless, the Senate is a co-equal branch of government and is instrumental, as you know, in the American system. So whether it's climate that Jonathan mentioned, or whether it's regulation, taxation, foreign affairs, whatever it is, the Senate is going to be key, and I'm going to watch for that. Not to mention that the House, the Democrats have a slim majority there as well, and they're up for re-election in 2022. Historically, the party in power has lost seats in the House.
Hello? Yeah?
Yeah, no, I'm done. Sorry, can you hear me?
Okay, so it's not 1 year we're worried about, it's 2 years. Is it
I guess, yeah.
Okay, got it. Thank you. All right. Well, this has been we've covered, I think, just about as much as we possibly can in terms of geography and topics, and going out for a year. There's been an encouraging amount of optimism, especially around the U.S.-India relationship, and hopefully that critical geostrategic link will maintain, deepen, and grow. That's from the point of view of those of us who aren't American or Indian. For us, it's a very important relationship for stability and for the things that the Honorable Shekhar Dutt talked about at the very beginning, the importance of democracy and maintaining the rule of law going forward. It feels like from the discussion that while the 6th was a terrible day, hopefully it won't be something that will resonate down through the years, except in terms of understanding some of these movements and how to counter them more effectively when they become violent or terroristic. But this change in administration won't necessarily create any sort of major ripples to the strong relationships that have been keeping us stable, especially the U.S.-India one. So that's very encouraging. I'd like to thank very much all of our panelists for their insight. I look forward to seeing them in a year from now. And I'd like to thank Global Youth. It's a very exciting endeavor with a lot of smart people who I'm very glad I didn't have to debate or manage in the last panel. You're too smart and quick. And I'd like to thank GCTC very much for, again, giving us the opportunity and the platform to discuss some of the world's most important and critical issues. Thank you.